I used to sell a lot of things on Craigslist to make some extra money. It was an easy way to get rid of items I no longer needed while helping someone else who was looking for a good deal. However, there was one encounter that still sends shivers down my spine to this day. It was a beautiful day, and I was feeling good. I had recently upgraded to a new laptop and decided to sell my old one on Craigslist. I took some pictures and listed all the details, and soon enough I received an email from someone who was interested in purchasing it. His name was Alex, and he said he was a college student who needed a laptop for his studies. We exchanged a few emails, and he seemed like a nice guy. He was polite and respectful, and we agreed to meet at a Starbucks near his college, since it was a public place and I thought it would be safe. I remember feeling excited to sell my old laptop and meet someone who needed it for their studies. I arrived at the Starbucks a few minutes early and decided to get a coffee while I waited for Alex. As I was sipping my latte, I saw a guy walk in and glance around the cafe. He looked up when he saw me, and I could tell it was him. He walked over to me and we introduced ourselves. At first, everything seemed normal. We exchanged pleasantries, and I handed him the laptop to take a look at it. He examined it carefully, and I could tell he knew what he was doing. He checked the specifications, ran some tests, and asked me some questions about it. He seemed satisfied with the laptop and told me he wanted to buy it. I remember feeling happy that I had found a buyer for my laptop so quickly. We started talking about the price, and we agreed on a fair amount. He pulled out his wallet and looked inside. That's when he told me that he didn't have any cash on him. He looked up at me with a pleading expression on his face and asked if he could trade something else for the laptop. I remember feeling a bit confused and curious about what he had in mind. That's when he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small baggie. My heart sank as I saw what was inside. I immediately knew what it was, and my mind started racing. He was offering me drugs in exchange for my laptop. I remember feeling scared and angry at the same time. He looked at me and said, "This is worth a lot of money. You can sell it and make a profit." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't know what to say, and I remember feeling paralyzed with fear. He must have seen the look on my face because he started to get agitated. He started to argue with me, saying that he really needed the laptop for school and that he had no other way to pay for it. He kept trying to convince me to take the drugs and sell them for money. I remember feeling trapped and vulnerable. I knew that I had to get out of there, but I didn't want to make him angry or upset. I tried to reason with him, but he was persistent. He kept saying that it was a good deal and that I would regret it if I didn't take it. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stood up and told him that I was leaving. As I turned to walk away, he grabbed my arm and tried to pull me back. I yanked my arm away and ran out of the Starbucks as fast as I could. I could hear him shouting after me, but I didn't look back. I just ran until I felt safe. I remember feeling so scared and shaken up by the encounter. I couldn't believe that someone would try to do something like that to me. I felt violated and vulnerable. After that experience, I never sold anything on Craigslist again. I realized how dangerous it could be to meet with strangers and exchange goods for money. I also felt angry that there are people out there who try to take advantage of others in vulnerable situations. Looking back, I realized that I should have been more cautious and taken more steps to ensure my safety. Meeting in a public place was a good start, but I should have brought a friend with me or told someone where I was going and who I was meeting. I also learned to trust my instincts. When Alex offered me drugs in exchange for the laptop, I should have ended the conversation right then and there. I shouldn't have allowed him to argue with me or convince me to take the drug. Overall, it was a terrifying experience, but it taught me some valuable lessons. I hope that by sharing my story, others can learn from my mistakes and avoid dangerous situations when using online marketplaces like Craigslist. I never thought much about Craigslist until I had a terrifying experience with it. It all started when I was looking for a used couch to buy for my new apartment. I saw an ad that seemed too good to be true. A leather sectional in perfect condition for only $150. I messaged the seller and got a reply right away. They said the couch was still available and gave me their address. I arrived at the address on a quiet street, and the house looked like it was in good condition. The seller, a middle-aged man, greeted me at the door and invited me in. The living room was tidy, and there was indeed a leather sectional in great condition, just like the pictures in the ad. I sat on it, and it felt comfortable, so I decided to buy it. As I was getting ready to leave, the man started to make small talk. He asked me if I was new to the area and if I had a girlfriend. I answered politely, but felt a little uneasy. Then he started to touch my arm and shoulder. He said he liked my muscles and asked if I worked out. I was caught off guard and started to feel uncomfortable. I tried to make an excuse to leave, but he kept insisting that I stay for a beer. I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed to stay for a quick drink. But as we were sitting in his living room, he started to make more inappropriate comments and touches. I started to feel really scared and didn't know what to do. I knew I had to get out of there as soon as possible. I made an excuse to leave and quickly got up from the couch. As I was walking towards the door, the man grabbed my arm and tried to pull me back. I was able to break free and ran out of the house as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I got to my car and locked the doors. As I drove away, my heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe how close I had come to something terrible. I knew that I had made a mistake by going to a stranger's house alone, and I vowed to be more careful in the future. I reported the incident to the police, and they said they would investigate. After I reported the incident to the police, I was told that they would look into it and get back to me. I didn't hear anything for a few days, so I called the station to follow up. They told me that they had gone to the man's house to question him, but he wasn't home. They left a message for him to contact them, but he never did. I felt frustrated and scared that the man was still out there, potentially doing the same thing to other unsuspecting buyers. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was lucky to have gotten away unscathed. A few weeks went by, and I had all but forgotten about the incident. That was until one day when I received a call from the police. They had caught the man and wanted me to come in to identify him. I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at the thought of seeing him again. I went to the station and was taken into a room with a one-way mirror. The man was brought in and sat across from me. As soon as I saw him, my heart started racing, and I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I could barely look at him without feeling sick. The man denied any wrongdoing, but the police had other evidence to prove otherwise. They had found out that he had been using Craigslist to lure men into his home, where he would make inappropriate advances and even try to assault them. They had found numerous other victims who had come forward with similar stories. I felt sick to my stomach knowing that I had come so close to being another one of his victims. I was relieved that he was finally caught, but at the same time I couldn't get rid of the feeling of vulnerability and fear that the experience had left me with. The police officer who had been handling my case told me that the man had been charged with multiple counts of assault and luring people through false advertisements on Craigslist. Apparently, he had been preying on vulnerable people for months, and the police had been tracking him down for some time. Finally, they had managed to catch him red-handed, and he had been taken into custody. The officer then asked me if I would be willing to testify against the man in court. I was hesitant at first, but I realized that if I didn't speak up, he could get away with his crimes. So I agreed to testify. A few months later, I found myself sitting in a courtroom, staring at the man who had tried to assault me. It was a surreal experience, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger, fear, and relief. The trial lasted for a week, during which time I had to recount my experience in detail and answer questions from the defense attorney. It was a grueling experience, but in the end, justice was served. The man was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to several years in prison. It was a bittersweet victory, as I knew that the trauma I had experienced would never fully go away, but at least I could take comfort in the fact that he would never be able to harm anyone else. After the trial, I decided to take a break from Craigslist and other online marketplaces. The experience had taught me to be more cautious and aware of my surroundings, and I didn't want to put myself in a similar situation again. Instead, I started to rely more on word of mouth and personal recommendations when looking for used items to buy. Looking back on the experience, I realized that it was a wake-up call. It reminded me that there are dangers in the world and that I need to be vigilant and cautious when dealing with strangers. It also made me appreciate the kindness of people who had helped me during that scary time, such as the police officer who had taken my case seriously and the friends who had supported me. In the end, I learned that the world can be a scary place, but that there are also good people out there who are willing to help. I will never forget what happened to me, but I won't let it define me either. Instead, I will use it as a lesson to be more cautious and aware in my daily life, and to always be grateful for the people who are there for me when I need them the most. I never thought anything bad could happen to me when using Craigslist to find roommates. I mean, sure, there were some weirdos and creeps out there, but I assumed I could easily spot them and avoid them. Boy, was I wrong. It all started when I posted an ad looking for a roommate to share my apartment with. I got a lot of responses, but one in particular caught my attention. The guy's name was Jack, and he seemed like a decent guy from his email. We agreed to meet up at a coffee shop near my place to discuss the details. At first, everything seemed normal. Jack was friendly and easy to talk to. He seemed genuinely interested in the apartment and even offered to pay the rent in advance. But as the conversation went on, I began to feel uneasy. There was something off about him. He kept staring at me with these piercing eyes, and his smile seemed a bit too wide. I brushed it off and told myself I was just being paranoid. But then, as we were leaving the coffee shop, he grabbed my arm and whispered, "I hope you're not planning on rejecting me." I pulled away quickly and told him I needed to think about it. I decided not to go through with the roommate arrangement with Jack. I didn't feel comfortable around him, and his behavior seemed a bit off. But then, things started to get really creepy. Jack began emailing me constantly, begging me to reconsider. He said he needed a place to stay urgently and that he would do anything to make it work. I didn't respond, hoping he would get the message and leave me alone. But he didn't. One day, I was walking home from work when I saw him standing across the street, staring at me with those piercing eyes. I quickened my pace, but I could feel him following me. When I turned around, he was still there, smiling that creepy smile. From then on, I was constantly on edge. I felt like I was being watched all the time, and I was too scared to leave my apartment alone. Every time my phone beeped with a new email notification, my heart would race with fear. It all came to a head one night when I was sitting in my living room trying to relax. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Jack was standing there holding a bouquet of flowers. He asked if we could talk, but I quickly shut the door and locked it. I could hear him pounding on the door and yelling my name, but I refused to let him in. Eventually, he gave up and left, but I knew that this was far from over. Jack was not going to give up that easily. After the incident with Jack at my doorstep, I became even more paranoid. I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. I started staying at a friend's house and tried to avoid going back to my apartment as much as possible. But that's when things started to get really bizarre. I started receiving packages at my friend's house, addressed to me but with no return address. Inside each package was a single item: a lock of hair, a photograph of me at a coffee shop, a note with my favorite quote written on it. It was clear that whoever was sending these packages had been watching me and knew everything about me. I immediately suspected Jack, but I had no proof. I went to the police, but they couldn't do anything without concrete evidence. I felt like I was going crazy, like I was trapped in a nightmare that would never end. One day, I received an email from an anonymous sender. The email contained a video, and when I clicked play, I saw footage of myself walking home from work. The camera angle was from behind me, and I realized that I had been followed without knowing it. The video ended with a message: "I'm always watching." I felt sick to my stomach. It was clear that whoever was stalking me was getting bolder and more dangerous. I knew I had to do something to protect myself, but I didn't know where to turn. Then, one day, I received a call from a woman who claimed to be a private investigator. She said she had been following my case and wanted to help me. At first, I was hesitant. How did she get my number? But then she told me something that made my blood run cold. She said she had been hired by Jack to follow me and gather information about me. Jack had been watching me for months, and he had become obsessed with me. He had hired the private investigator to get closer to me. and he had been using her to send me those packages and emails. I couldn't believe it. The person I had been trying to avoid and protect myself from had been watching me all along, and I had no idea. I knew I had to take action, and fast, but I didn't know if I could ever feel safe again. With the help of the private investigator, I was able to get a restraining order against Jack. It was a relief to know that he wouldn't be able to come near me or contact me again, but the fear and paranoia lingered on. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching me. Every time I left my friend's house or went back to my apartment to gather my belongings, I felt like I was being followed. I installed extra locks on my doors and windows, and I started carrying pepper spray with me at all times. One day, I received a call from the private investigator. She said she had some new information that could help me feel more secure. Apparently, Jack had been arrested for stalking another woman, and he was being held in jail. She also told me that the packages and emails had stopped coming, and that there was no sign of anyone following me anymore. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe it was finally over. Maybe I could start living my life without looking over my shoulder all the time. But then, a few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Jack, written from jail. In the letter, he apologized for everything he had done and begged me to forgive him. He said he was going through a tough time in his life and that he didn't know what he was doing. He promised that he would never bother me again. I didn't know what to think. Was he being sincere? Was he just trying to manipulate me again? I felt torn between my desire to move on from this nightmare and my fear that it would start all over again. In the end, I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. I didn't respond to the letter, but I also didn't press charges for violating the restraining order. I just wanted to put this whole ordeal behind me and move on with my life. It's been a few years since that terrifying experience, and I've managed to rebuild my sense of security and trust in people. But I still think about Jack sometimes, and I wonder if he's still out there, watching and waiting. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again, but I know that I'm stronger now because of what I've been through. If there's one thing I learned from this experience, it's that we can never be too careful when it comes to our safety. We should always trust our instincts and take action to protect ourselves, even if it means taking drastic measures. Because when it comes to our personal safety, there's no such thing as being too paranoid.